He had nothing left, yet the humans still defeated a tyrant alien with a single bid to save the little alien sisters. The stench of desperation hung thick in the air of Trading Station Meridian's auction block, mixing sweat, fear, and the metallic tang of alien pheromones into something that made Kael Brennan's stomach turn. He shifted his weight against the grimy wall, trying to ignore the way his companion ferret Spark chittered anxiously from his shoulder perch. The little creature's claws dug deeper into Kael's worn cargo jacket with each lot that crossed the raised platform. "Next lot," the auctioneer's voice crackled through failing speakers. "2 Nexari juveniles, perfect for mining operations. Bioluminescent capabilities confirmed, no defects." Kael's blood went cold. 2 small figures were dragged onto the platform. Children, barely waist-high to the human guards shoving them forward. Their pale blue skin flickered with patterns of light that even Kael's untrained eye could read as pure terror. The older child, maybe 12 in human years, wrapped protective arms around a smaller one who couldn't have been more than 8. Both had the delicate, ethereal features of the Nexari species, with large eyes that held far too much understanding of their situation. Spark made a sound Kael had never heard before, a keening whine that seemed to echo the children's distress. The ferret's fur stood on end as the younger child's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in rapid, desperate flashes. Whatever she was trying to communicate, it was breaking his companion's heart. "Starting bid at 5,000 credits, the auctioneer announced. "These specimens are ideal for deep core extraction work. Their natural light eliminates need for expensive equipment. The casual way the man spoke about children, living, breathing, terrified children, as mining equipment made Kael's hands clench into fists. He thought of his own siblings, lost in the factory collapse on Kepler 7. The way little Sarah had looked at him with such trust right before the supports gave way. The way he'd been powerless to save any of them. A fat merchant in expensive clothes raised his hand. 5,000. 6, called another voice from the crowd. Kael checked his credit balance with shaking fingers. 7,200 credits. Every penny he'd saved from 3 years of hauling cargo across the sector. His entire future. His only hope of buying his own ship. His ticket off this miserable frontier. The older child's light patterns shifted to what looked like pleading as her gaze swept the crowd. When her eyes met Kael's across the auction house, something inside his chest cracked open. She was protecting her sister the same way he'd tried to protect Sarah and Tommy. The same way he'd failed. 8,000, someone bid. Kael's throat went dry. He had enough for one child, maybe. Not both. Never both. But looking at the way they clung to each other, he knew separating them would be its own kind of death sentence. 9,000, he heard himself say, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. The auctioneer looked surprised. Cargo haulers weren't typically players in this market. 9,000, going once. The man's eyes swept the room, looking for higher bids from the usual suspects. Spark pressed against Kael's neck, small, warm body trembling. The ferret had been with him since the collapse, the only living thing that had stayed when everything else fell apart. Now Spark was reacting to these children's fear as if they were family. Going twice. Every rational thought screamed at Kael to stay silent. Those credits represented years of eating protein paste instead of real food. Sleeping in his ship instead of renting quarters, working double shifts until his hands bled from handling cargo containers. All so he could someday own something instead of just surviving day by day. But the younger child's bioluminescence was fading, her patterns becoming weak and erratic. She was giving up hope. 10,000, Kael shouted, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. The auction house went dead quiet. The auctioneer blinked in shock. Kael had just bid more than the children were worth to anyone except the most desperate mining operations. Sold to the cargo hauler, the man finally announced. As the gavel fell, Kael realized he just spent every credit he had to save 2 children he couldn't communicate with, couldn't legally adopt, and had no idea how to care for. He'd thrown away his entire future on an impulse that made no logical sense. But when the older child's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what could only be gratitude, Kael knew he'd made the only choice his conscience would let him live with. The transaction completed with brutal efficiency. Credits transferred, ownership documents issued, children released into his custody like any other cargo. Kael's hands shook as he led them away from the auction block, Spark chittering encouragingly from his shoulder. The sisters walked close together, their bioluminescent communication continuing in rapid, complex patterns. Up close, Kael could see they were even younger than he'd first thought. The elder might be 10 or 11, the younger barely past toddler stage by human standards. Their clothes were little more than rags, their feet bare, their skin showing the telltale signs of malnutrition common among trafficking victims. "Hey," Kael said softly, crouching to their eye level outside the auction house. My name is Kael. This is Spark." The ferret climbed down his arm to perch on his outstretched hand, whiskers twitching as he studied the children. The older girl tilted her head, considering. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to something calmer, more curious. She pointed to herself. "Nyra," she said carefully, the word heavily accented but clear. Then she gestured to her sister. "Zela." Nyra, Zela. Kael repeated the names, committing them to memory. "Are you hurt?" Nyra's communication patterns flickered as she processed the question. She touched her sister's shoulder, then made a gesture toward Spark. The ferret, seeming to understand something Kael didn't, climbed down onto the ground and approached Zela slowly. The younger child reached out with one trembling finger to touch Spark's fur. The moment they made contact, her bioluminescent patterns exploded into brilliant, warm light that seemed to fill the space around them. Spark's tail, which had been drooping with fatigue, suddenly perked up. A small scratch on his paw from their cramped ship quarters simply disappeared. "Healing," Kael whispered, understanding flooding through him. "You can heal." Zela smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness he'd seen from either child. Her sister Nyra's patterns shifted to what looked like pride, then concern as she glanced around the busy station corridor. Kael got the message. This wasn't the place for demonstrations of unique abilities, not when those abilities were exactly what made Nexari children valuable to the wrong kind of buyers. "Come on," he said, standing and gesturing toward the docking bays. "Let's get you somewhere safe." His ship, the Wanderer's Rest, was barely more than a cargo hauler with a tiny living compartment attached. But it was clean, secure, and most importantly, it was his. As the airlock sealed behind them, both children's bioluminescent patterns shifted to something that looked like relief. Kael's emergency food supplies were basic: protein bars, vitamin paste, water recyclers. But the children ate like they hadn't seen real food in weeks, which, he realized grimly, they probably hadn't. Spark curled up between them as they sat on Kael's narrow bunk, the ferret's presence seeming to calm them both. As Zela ate, her bioluminescent patterns grew stronger, more vibrant. When she finished her meal, she reached out to touch a dent in the ship's wall plating, a memento from a particularly rough docking maneuver last month. Under her small palm, the metal seemed to flow, straightening itself back to perfect smoothness. "Not just healing," Kael murmured. "Restoration." Nyra had been watching him carefully throughout the meal. Now she stood, her patterns shifting to something formal, ceremonial. She placed one hand on her chest, then extended it toward Kael, speaking in carefully pronounced standard. "Thank you for our lives." The simple words hit Kael like a physical blow. No one had thanked him for anything in years. His work was invisible, his presence barely tolerated, his existence reduced to moving cargo from point A to point B for whoever would pay. But these children were looking at him like he was a hero instead of a failed factory worker with nothing left to lose. Spark climbed up onto his shoulder, nuzzling against his neck with unusual affection. The ferret had bonded with the children already. Kael could see it, in the way the little animal positioned himself between them protectively, the way his usual skittish energy had settled into watchful calm. "We need to figure out what to do next," Kael said, more to himself than to them. "The ownership papers are legal, but—" A sharp metallic clang from the ship's hull cut off his words. Then another. Someone was knocking on his airlock, hard, demanding, and definitely not friendly. Nyra's bioluminescent patterns flashed into rapid, panicked sequences. Zela pressed close to her sister, both children's light dimming as they tried to make themselves invisible. Spark's fur stood on end, a low growl rumbling from his tiny throat. "Open up!" a voice demanded from outside. "Station security! We need to speak with the occupant of this vessel." Kael's mind raced. Had someone already reported the unusual children? Were the authorities here to confiscate them? Or worse, was this a setup by whoever had been planning to buy them originally? The knocking came again, more insistent. "Open this airlock or we'll override it." Kael looked at the terrified children, at Spark's protective posture, at the trust in Nyra's large eyes. He'd spent his life savings to save them. He wasn't going to hand them over to anyone without a fight. But as he reached for the ship's defensive systems, Nyra caught his arm. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to something urgent, hopeful. She pointed toward the airlock, then placed her hand over her heart. "Family," she whispered. Before Kael could ask what she meant, the ship's external sensors chimed with an incoming message. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a tall, elegant Nexari woman in military uniform. Her features were similar to Nyra's, but older, harder, marked by what looked like years of combat experience. "My daughters," the woman said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Please, I know you have my daughters." Lady Commander Thessian of the Royal Nexari Guard had fought through 3-sector wars, negotiated peace treaties with hostile species, and led diplomatic missions to the farthest reaches of known space. But standing in the cramped cargo ship belonging to a human she'd never met, watching her daughters eat their first real meal in weeks, she felt more vulnerable than she had since their capture. "They were taken during a raid on our science vessel," she explained to Kael, accepting a cup of synthetic coffee with hands that barely trembled. "Pirates hit us near the Vorthan Nebula. My security detail was killed. I was off ship at a diplomatic meeting when it happened." Her daughters pressed close to her sides, their bioluminescent patterns bright with joy at their reunion. But Thessian could see the trauma in their dimmed responses, the way they flinched at sudden movements, the protective way they clung to each other. "I've been tracking them for 6 weeks, she continued, following the trafficking networks, bribing informants, calling in every favor, When I heard about the auction on Meridian Station, I came as fast as I could." "But you didn't make it in time," Kael observed quietly. Thessian's jaw tightened. "No, I arrived 20 minutes after the auction ended. 20 minutes. The weight of those lost minutes hung heavy in the recycled air of the ship." Spark, who had been curled around Zela's shoulders like a living scarf, chittered softly. The younger child giggled, the first truly happy sound Kael had heard from either of them. She whispered something in Nexari to her mother. "She says the fuzzy one kept them brave," Thessian translated, a ghost of a smile crossing her face, "and that the human with the sad eyes saved them when everyone else looked away." Kael felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Thessian said firmly. "What you did was extraordinary. The legal documents show you paid your entire credit balance for them. Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Kael glanced at the children, at their trust-filled eyes, at Spark's contented purring as Zela stroked his fur. "I had siblings," he said finally. "Lost them in an industrial accident on Kepler 7. Factory supports gave way, killed 43 people including my brother and sister. I couldn't save them, couldn't even get their bodies out for proper burial." He paused, old pain rising in his throat. "But I could save your daughters." Thessian studied him with the calculating gaze of a military officer. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone looking to exploit them. Their abilities are significant." As if summoned by her words, Nyra stood and walked to a section of the ship's wall where several control cables had been damaged in a recent meteor shower. Kael had been planning to repair them at the next port, but as he watched, the girl placed her hands on the damaged area. Soft light emanated from her palms, and the frayed cables began to weave themselves back together, stronger than before. "Force manipulation," Thessian explained. "She can reshape matter at the molecular level within a limited range. It's incredibly rare, even among our people." Zela, not to be outdone, touched a wilted plant Kael kept near his small observation port. Under her fingers, the dying leaves turned green and vibrant, new growth sprouting as if the plant had been given months of perfect care in seconds. "Biological restoration," Thessian continued. "She can accelerate healing, reverse damage, even bring dying organisms back to full health. Together, their abilities are powerful enough to be worth killing for," Kael finished grimly. "Yes, which is why I need to ask you something." Kael Brennan of the cargo vessel Wanderer's Rest. Thessian's voice took on a formal tone. "What do you want from us? Money? Technology? Safe passage to Nexari space?" The question caught Kael off guard. What?" "You saved my daughters when you could have walked away. You spent your life. Savings on children you couldn't even communicate with. You've shown them more kindness in 6 hours than they saw in 6 weeks of captivity. So what do you want in return?" Kael looked around his tiny ship. The cramped quarters, the recycled air, the constant hum of aging machinery. Then he looked at the children, at Spark curled contentedly between them, at the way Thessian watched him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "I want them to be safe," he said, "and happy, and together." "That's all?" "That's everything." Something shifted in Thessian's expression, surprise giving way to a warmer emotion Kael couldn't quite identify. "The legal documents make you their owner under Federation law. Then I'm returning ownership to you immediately. What if I told you that won't be enough? That there are people who will never stop hunting them as long as they exist?" Before Kael could answer, the ship's proximity alarms began blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the small craft as the automated systems detected multiple large vessels approaching at high speed. "Overlord Cruex," Thessian whispered, her face going pale. "He's found us." Through the observation port, Kael could see massive warships dropping out of hyperspace around Meridian Station. Their hulls were scarred and battle-worn, flying the colors of the Solthari hegemony, a pirate confederation known for slave trading and worse. "Who's Cruex?" Kael asked, even as his hands moved automatically to the ship's defensive systems. "A Solthari warlord who's been trying to acquire my daughters for months. He has a theory that their combined abilities could be weaponized, used to destabilize entire planetary defense networks, or heal his troops during battle." The children's bioluminescent patterns flashed with terror as the name registered. Nyra spoke rapidly to her mother in Nexari. "She says he was the one who ordered their capture originally," Thessian translated. "The pirates who raided our ship were working for him." Station-wide communications crackled to life. "Attention all vessels. By order of Overlord Cruex of the Solthari hegemony, this station is now under martial law. All ships will prepare for boarding and inspection. Any vessel attempting to leave will be destroyed." Kael's military training, such as it was from his brief stint in the Merchant Marine, kicked in. How many ships? 6 heavy cruisers, at least 2 boarding vessels, were outnumbered and outgunned. Thessian's voice was steady, but Kael could see the desperation in her eyes. A new alarm joined the cacophony, this one from the station itself. "Warning, quantum drive instability detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. Drive failure imminent." "The station's quantum core," Kael breathed. "If it fails..." 50,000 colonists die when the station loses power and life support," Thessian finished. including us. Through the observation port, they could see other ships trying to evacuate, only to be turned back by Crew X's vessels. The Solthari had effectively trapped everyone on a dying station. "There has to be something we can do," Kael muttered, his mind racing through possibilities. Nyra tugged at his sleeve, her bioluminescent patterns urgent. She pointed toward the station's central core, visible through the port, then placed her hand over Zela's. Both children's patterns synchronized, creating a complex light display that seemed almost like a technical schematic. "They think they can stabilize the quantum drive," Thessian said, wonder in her voice. "Their combined abilities. Nyra's matter manipulation and Zela's restoration powers. But it would require them to be inside the core chamber." "That's suicide," Kael said flatly. "The radiation levels alone would kill them in minutes." "Not if someone who understood the technical systems could create proper shielding," Thessian countered. "Someone who knew how to work with quantum drives and could coordinate their efforts." They stared at each other as the implications sank in. Kael had spent years maintaining cargo ship engines. Not quantum drives, but the principles were similar, and the children's abilities could theoretically compensate for the kind of systematic failures that had stumped every engineer on the station. "It's insane," he said. "It's our only chance." Another transmission cut through the ship's communications. "This is Overlord Crew X to all station personnel. Surrender the Nexari children known as Nyra and Zela, and I will permit the evacuation of non-essential personnel before this station's destruction. You have 1 hour." The children pressed closer to their mother, fear bright in their bioluminescent patterns. But underneath the fear, Kael could see something else. Determination. They were barely more than babies, but they were willing to sacrifice themselves to save 50,000 strangers. "No," he said firmly. "There has to be another way." But even as he spoke, his mind was already working through the technical challenges. The station's quantum core was a massive, complex system designed to fold space-time around the station for faster-than-light travel. If it destabilized completely, the resulting implosion would indeed kill everyone aboard. But if someone could get inside and manually recalibrate the quantum field generators while providing the precise matter manipulation and energy restoration the system required— "You're thinking about it," Thessian observed. "I'm thinking it's impossible." "You're also thinking you know how to do it." Kael looked at the children again, at Spark, who was watching him with unusual intensity, at Thessian, whose military bearing couldn't hide her desperate hope. "Even if we could stabilize the core, Crew X isn't going to just let us leave. We'd be trapped on a functional station with a warlord who wants to turn your daughters into weapons." "One problem at a time," Thessian said. "First, we save 50,000 lives. Then we deal with Crew X." The ship shuddered as another vessel docked forcefully with the station nearby. Through the communications array, they could hear the sounds of fighting as Crew X's troops began boarding operations. Kael closed his eyes, thinking of Sarah and Tommy, of the factory collapse that had taught him how quickly everything could be lost, but also thinking of second chances, of small acts of courage, of the way these children trusted him despite every reason not to. "Spark stays with the girls," he said finally. "No matter what happens, he keeps them calm and connected. Can you get us to the quantum core without being detected?" Thessian's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Commander of the Royal Nexari Guard, remember? I think I can manage a little stealth infiltration." As they prepared to leave the ship, Zela pressed something into Kael's hand, a small crystal that pulsed with warm light. When he looked at her questioningly, she patted his chest, right over his heart. "She's giving you a piece of her light," Thessian translated softly. "So she can find you even in the dark." The simple gesture nearly broke Kael's composure. These children had been through hell, and they were still offering comfort to the people trying to protect them. "Let's go save a station," he said, tucking the crystal safely away. The quantum drive chamber was a cathedral of technology, soaring 3 stories high and humming with barely contained energy. Massive field generators arranged in perfect geometric patterns created a web of forces that normally kept space-time itself bent around the station. Now, those same generators sparked and fluctuated wildly, their harmonic resonances falling further out of sync with each passing minute. Radiation's at the upper limit of what the children can handle, Thessian reported, checking her scanner. We have maybe 20 minutes before exposure becomes lethal. Kael was already deep in the technical analysis, his trained eye picking out the cascade failures that had the station's best engineers stumped. It's not the generators themselves, he muttered. The quantum field is collapsing because the matter/energy conversion ratios are off. Someone tried to boost power output without recalibrating the harmonic frequencies. Can you fix it? Normally. Number. The quantum resonance chambers would need to be physically rebuilt from the inside, and the power couplings would require molecular-level precision to repair. He looked at the children, who were studying the massive machinery with intense concentration. But normally, I don't have a matter manipulator and a restoration specialist. Nyra stepped forward, her bioluminescent patterns shifting into something that looked almost like technical schematics. She placed her hands on one of the failed coupling arrays, and Kael watched in amazement as the twisted metal began to flow like liquid, reshaping itself into perfect geometric alignment. She can see the quantum field, Thessian breathed. The patterns on her skin, they're matching the mathematical relationships between the generators. Zela joined her sister, touching a section of the central core that had been overloaded and burned out. Under her small hands, the dead machinery began to glow with renewed energy, power levels climbing back toward optimal ranges. But working together was taking its toll. Both children's bioluminescent patterns were dimming, their small bodies struggling against the radiation and the enormous energy expenditure their abilities required. Spark chittered anxiously from his position on Nyra's shoulder, sensing his young friend's distress. The ferret's presence seemed to help them maintain focus, but Kael could see they were reaching their limits. We need to coordinate this better, he decided. Nyra, can you reshape the primary coupling array while I recalibrate the harmonic frequencies? Zela, wait until we have the structure perfect, then restore power to the entire system at once. The next 15 minutes were the most intense of Kael's life. Working with the children was like conducting an orchestra where every instrument was a force of nature. Nyra's matter manipulation flowed in perfect sync with his technical adjustments, while Zela provided precisely calibrated bursts of restorative energy exactly when and where the system needed them. Thessian kept watch at the chamber entrance, her military scanner tracking the approach of Crew X's boarding parties. They're 2 levels down and moving fast, she reported. Whatever you're going to do it now. The quantum field began to stabilize, its chaotic fluctuation smoothing into the steady resonance pattern that meant success. The chamber's emergency lighting switched from red to amber, then to the steady blue that indicated normal operation. It's working, Kael said in amazement. We actually did it. But their celebration was cut short by the sound of heavy boots on metal flooring. Overlord Cruex himself appeared at the chamber entrance, flanked by a dozen armed Solthari warriors. He was a massive creature, even by alien standards, with the scaled hide and predatory features of his species enhanced by cybernetic implants that spoke of countless battles. How touching, Cruex rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. The human and his pets have fixed our little problem. Now I can collect my prizes and eliminate the station at my leisure. Thessian stepped protectively in front of the children, her sidearm drawn but hopelessly outmatched. You'll have to go through me. That can be arranged. Cruex gestured and his warriors raised their weapons, but before anyone could fire, Nyra stepped out from behind her mother. Her bioluminescent patterns blazed brighter than Kael had ever seen, creating complex geometric shapes in the air around her. As she raised her hands, every metal surface in the chamber began to resonate in harmony with her abilities. No more, she said in clear standard, her young voice carrying absolute determination. No more running. No more fear. The quantum field generators responded to her call. Under her direction, the same forces that bent space-time around the station began to bend in new ways, creating a localized gravity well that pinned Crux's warriors to the floor, distorting their energy weapons until they became useless chunks of twisted metal. Zela joined her sister, her healing abilities working in reverse to drain the energy from the Solthari's cybernetic implants. Crux himself staggered as his enhanced strength and speed abandoned him, leaving him as vulnerable as any organic creature. "Impossible," the warlord gasped. "Children cannot command such power." "They're not just children," Kael said, understanding flooding through him. "They're royal family, aren't they? Thessian, your daughters aren't just gifted, they're heirs to something much more important." Thessian's smile was fierce with pride. "The Nexari royal house has guarded the secrets of quantum manipulation for centuries. My daughters are the next generation of that knowledge. The bridge between our ancient wisdom and the technology of the future." Spark, sensing that the immediate danger had passed, scampered down from Nyra's shoulder to investigate their captives. The ferret's natural curiosity seemed to amuse Zela, who giggled as he sniffed at the immobilized warriors. "The station is secure," Thessian announced after checking her communications. "Crux's fleet is surrendering. Without their leader and boarding parties, they're just pirates facing superior firepower from station security." But Kael was thinking beyond the immediate crisis. "This won't end here," he said. "Word will get out about what your daughters can do. Other warlords, other governments, other interests. They'll never be safe. Which is why," a new voice interrupted, "we must offer them the protection they deserve." Ambassador Vextai of the Galactic Federation entered the chamber with a full diplomatic escort. The tall, multi-armed alien moved with the fluid grace of his species, his translation implant rendering his words in perfect standard. "The Federation has been monitoring this situation," Vextai continued. "The actions of these children have saved not just this station, but prevented a war. Overlord Crux's destabilization of quantum drives was spreading. 6 more stations in this sector were showing similar failures." A cascade effect, Kael realized. He was trying to create a pattern of disasters that would destabilize the entire region. Exactly. With the Nexari children as his weapons, he could have held dozens of systems hostage. Vextai gestured to his escorts, who began formally arresting the immobilized Solthari. Instead, their refusal to be weaponized and their heroic actions here have exposed his entire network. Thessian stepped forward. "What are you proposing?" "Full diplomatic immunity for your daughters, backed by Federation law. Legal recognition of their special status and protection against exploitation. And for the human Kael Brennan, who showed such extraordinary courage and compassion." Vextai paused dramatically. "Citizenship in the Federation, with full honors as a hero of the Alliance." The words hit Kael like a physical blow. "I'm not a hero. I just did what needed doing." "Which is exactly what heroes do," Thessian said softly. "They see what's right and act on it, regardless of the cost." Zela tugged at Kael's sleeve, her bioluminescent patterns bright with happiness. When he looked down, she held up Spark, who had somehow managed to fall asleep during all the excitement. The ferret's peaceful expression seemed to sum up the entire situation. Crisis resolved, family safe, time to rest. "The children would like you to stay with them," Thessian translated unnecessarily. Kael could read the invitation in their glowing patterns. "As would I." "I don't have anything to offer," Kael said. "No money, no property, no future beyond hauling cargo." "You have everything we need," Thessian replied. "Courage, compassion, the ability to see children as children instead of weapons or tools." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something more personal than diplomatic. "And, if I'm being honest, I find myself quite attracted to humans who are willing to sacrifice everything for people they barely know." Ambassador Vextai cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should continue these discussions somewhere more comfortable. The Federation has prepared quarters for all of you aboard our diplomatic vessel." As they prepared to leave the quantum chamber, Kael took one last look around at the machinery he and the children had repaired. The steady blue glow of the operational system seemed like a promise that broken things could be fixed, that impossible problems could have simple solutions, that sometimes the right people coming together could save thousands of lives. Spark chittered softly from Zela's arms, and both children's patterns shifted to something that looked unmistakably like contentment. They were safe. They were together. And they were surrounded by people who would protect them not for what they could do, but for who they were. "Ready?" Thessian asked. Kael looked at his new family, because that's what they were now, he realized. A cargo hauler, a military commander, 2 gifted children, and 1 very sleepy ferret. It wasn't the future he'd planned, but it was better than anything he'd dared to hope for. "Ready," he said. 6 months later, Kael Brennan stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Nexari Royal Palace, wearing ceremonial robes that felt more expensive than his old ship. The fabric was embedded with microscopic fibers that responded to light the same way Nexari skin did, creating subtle patterns that complemented his daughter's natural bioluminescence. His daughter's. Even after all this time, the thought still amazed him. "Do you, Kael Brennan of Earth, accept the bonds of parentage with Nyra and Zela of the Royal House of Nexari?" the High Ceremonial asked in 3 languages simultaneously. "I do," Kael replied, his voice steady despite the hundreds of witnesses from dozens of species filling the great hall. Nyra and Zela stepped forward together, their formal adoption robes trailing behind them like liquid starlight. They'd grown in the months since Meridian Station, not just physically but in confidence and happiness. Regular meals, proper education, and most importantly, the security of knowing they were loved and protected had transformed them from terrified refugees into the bright, curious children they were meant to be. They placed their small hands in his, and their bioluminescent patterns synchronized with the ceremonial fibers in his robes. For a moment, the entire hall was filled with soft, warm light that spoke of family bonds stronger than blood. "By the ancient laws of our people and the modern statutes of the Galactic Federation," the High Ceremonial announced, "this family is sealed in law and custom. May their light shine eternal." Spark, wearing a tiny formal collar made of the same responsive material, chittered approvingly from his place of honor on a ceremonial perch. The ferret had become something of a celebrity in his own right, the first non-sentient creature ever granted formal citizenship in Nexari space. As the ceremony concluded, Thessian joined them at the central dais. She wore the full dress uniform of a Nexari royal commander, but her smile was purely maternal as she watched her daughters beam with happiness. "How does it feel to be officially part of the royal house?" she asked Kael quietly. "Terrifying," he admitted. 6 months ago, I was hauling cargo for subsistence wages. Now I'm a prince consort with diplomatic immunity and a staff of advisors who keep trying to teach me proper protocol. "You saved 50,000 lives and stopped a war," Thessian reminded him. "I think you can handle some fancy dinners." Their quiet conversation was interrupted by Ambassador Vextai, who approached with his usual diplomatic grace. "Congratulations on the adoption, Your Highness," he said to Kael. "I trust you've seen the latest reports from the Meridian sector." Kael nodded grimly. The quantum stabilization technique he and the children had developed had been applied to 17 other stations and colonies, preventing what could have been the worst technological disaster in Federation history. The simple mechanical principles he'd learned maintaining cargo haulers, combined with the children's abilities, had revolutionized quantum drive technology. "The Federation Science Council estimates that your innovations will prevent approximately 2,000 drive failures over the next decade," Vextai continued. "That translates to millions of lives saved and trillions of credits in prevented damages." "We just fixed what was broken," Kael said, uncomfortable as always with praise. "Anyone with basic engineering knowledge could have done the same." "No," Nyra interjected. her bioluminescent patterns bright with certainty. Others saw big problem, wanted big solution. You saw simple problem, made simple fix. Her standard had improved dramatically over the months, though she still preferred to communicate in the rapid light patterns of her native language when excited. Zela nodded agreement, adding her own patterns to create a complex display that roughly translated to "Papa sees truth when others see complications." The reception that followed was a blend of Nexari ceremony and Federation diplomacy, with representatives from dozens of worlds offering congratulations and, inevitably, propositions. Several mining corporations had already approached Kael about consulting opportunities that would give them access to the children's abilities. Each proposal had been politely but firmly declined. They're children, not tools, Kael had told the latest delegation that morning. They'll choose their own paths when they're ready. Now, as the formal festivities wound down, the family retreated to their private quarters in the palace's residential wing. The rooms were larger than Kael's entire former ship, but they'd been decorated with personal touches, holographic pictures from their travels, Spark's elaborate climbing structure, and the children's artwork covering one wall in a riot of color and bioluminescent patterns. "Papa," Zela said as they settled into the common room, "tell story again." About Factory and Sarah and Tommy. It had become their evening ritual. The children were fascinated by Kael's life before they met, especially his lost siblings. In their young minds, Sarah and Tommy were like guardian spirits who had guided their papa to save them. "Sarah was 2 years younger than me," Kael began, settling into his favorite chair with Spark curled in his lap. "She could fix anything with engines. Said machines talk to her the same way plants talk to you, Zela." "And Tommy," Nyra prompted, though she knew the story by heart. Tommy was the brave one, always standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. He would have liked you to, would have been proud that his big brother finally learned how to be brave like him. Thessian watched from the doorway, her expression soft with affection. Over the months, their relationship had evolved from desperate alliance to deep partnership to something approaching love. They were taking it slowly. There were cultural differences to navigate, political implications to consider, and most importantly, 2 children whose stability came first. But there were moments, like this one, when they felt like a real family, complete in ways that none of them had expected. "We have news," Thessian said, entering the room with an official-looking datapad. "The Federation Council has approved our proposal." Kael looked up from his storytelling. "The Education Initiative. Approved unanimously. The Brennan Thessian Foundation for Cross-Species Understanding will receive full funding to establish schools throughout the frontier sectors, places where human practical knowledge and Nexari quantum sciences can be taught together." It had been Kael's idea, born from watching his daughters struggle to bridge 2 very different ways of understanding the universe. Human engineering was based on physical principles and mechanical solutions. Nexari science worked through harmony with quantum fields and energy manipulation. But together, the 2 approaches could solve problems that neither could handle alone. "The first school will be built on Meridian Station," Thessian continued, "where it all started." Nyra and Zela's patterns flashed with excitement. They'd been heavily involved in designing the curriculum, eager to help other children learn to see problems from multiple perspectives. "There's one more thing," Thessian added, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "The Council also approved my request for extended leave. I'll be stepping down as Royal Commander to focus on the Foundation full-time." Kael felt his heart rate increase. "That's a big decision." "It's the right decision." She moved to sit beside him, close enough that their children could see the growing bond between their parents. "I've spent 20 years serving my people through military duty. Now I want to serve them by building something that will last for generations." "And?" Kael asked, sensing there was more. Thessian smiled, the expression that transformed her stern military bearing into something warm and inviting. And I've fallen in love with a cargo hauler who taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is save 2 children who need you. Spark chittered approvingly as Kael leaned over to kiss her. Their first real kiss, not counting the desperate embrace after the Meridian crisis. The children erupted in delighted bioluminescent displays, their patterns creating a light show that reflected their joy. When they finally broke apart, Zela scrambled into Kael's lap while Nyra claimed Thessians. The 4 of them sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars through the great windows of their palace home. "What happens now?" Kael asked eventually. "Now we build schools," Thessian said. "We raise our daughters. We help other children learn that being different doesn't make you dangerous. And we show the galaxy that families come in all shapes and sizes," Nyra added solemnly, her patterns shifting to something that looked like determination. "Even shapes with fuzzy tails," Zela giggled, scratching Spark behind his ears. Outside their windows, the ships of the Federation fleet maintained their protective patrol, ensuring that no one would threaten this small family that had already changed so much. But inside their rooms, surrounded by love and light and the contented sounds of a sleeping ferret, Kael Brennan finally understood what it meant to have everything. He'd started with nothing. No money, no prospects, no future beyond the next cargo run. But in choosing to save 2 frightened children, he'd found not just a family, but a purpose that would shape the next generation of galactic cooperation. The foundation they were building would help thousands of children learn to bridge the gap between different species and ways of thinking. The quantum stabilization techniques would save millions of lives across the galaxy, and their family would serve as living proof that love could transcend species, culture, and circumstance. As the children drifted off to sleep in the warmth of their parents' arms, their bioluminescent patterns gradually dimmed to the soft, steady glow that meant perfect contentment. Spark opened one eye, surveyed his extended family with satisfaction, then curled deeper into the growing pile of sleepy beings. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were schools to build, children to teach, and a galaxy to show that cooperation was stronger than conflict. But tonight, in the quiet of their home, a former cargo hauler held his family close and marveled at how saving 2 small lives had somehow saved his own. The stars wheeled overhead, carrying ships full of cargo and dreams and possibility. But for the first time in years, Kael Brennan wasn't watching them with longing. He was exactly where he belonged, with the people who had taught him that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you choose to care about someone other than yourself. And in the soft glow of Nexari bioluminescence, surrounded by love and protected by hope, he finally understood that he had everything he'd ever really needed. He had family.